The Passport of Mallam Ilia by Cyprian Ekwensi. Chapter 1, Part 1. Kanemi's Daughter. My name is Mallam Alhaji Ibrahim Ilia. I was born 65 years ago at a time when a man was a man and women were won by those who deserved them. As a youth, my life was wild and there was nothing I loved better than a good fight or a hard race on horseback. My parents were wealthy and saw to it that I got nearly everything I wanted without question. Slaves, gold, horses, merchandise in plenty, and the best company at Kano. As I grew, my parents began to talk to me about taking a wife, and they sent to me all the beautiful girls within the famous town wall, but I was not attracted to any of them. I prided myself on being a man and did not consider it gallant merely to buy or take on a wife. I wanted something more romantic. One evening, we sat around the fire outside my father's house, talking about brave men of the past, the prospect of the British bringing an army to Kano, who would oppose them if they did, and what chances we had of beating them back. In the middle of our heated discussion, we heard the clatter of horses' hoofs. A company of men cantered up to our gate, and they were Arab traders. Splendid turbans crowned their heads. Their noses were concealed in dust masks. "Greetings while you rest," they hailed. "You are welcome," I answered. "How is it with you? Can we be of any help?" "Yes," sneered the leader of the group. "You can be of the greatest help if you are not cowards." At the mention of that word coward, my sword blade flashed out. The firelight catching against it as I sprang at the speaker's horse made it glisten dangerously. The great man reared backwards, and with a simple movement of his riding whip, flicked the weapon clean out of my hand and roared with laughter. "A brave lad, truly. Ha, ha, a brave lad. How would you like to win the hand of my daughter Zara?" My companions, who had also sprung to their feet at the mention of that obnoxious word, paused and regarded my falling sword with a surprise no less than mine. It was the first time I had ever been disarmed by anyone, so easily too, and in the presence of my friends and hero worshippers. "Get out of here," I roared, "you and your daughter." "Gently, my young man, lest I make you sorry for your words. How dare you speak like that to Kanemi, prince of the Tuaregs?" He looked at me with a piercing glance, and for a moment I thought he was deciding to ride me down. But he changed his mind apparently and yelled out an order. "Maji, put Zara down and let them see her." One of the men in the rear rode briskly forward and leaping down helped another figure down from the same horse. She was clad in white and her head was bowed. We could not see her face, but it was easy to guess that she was tall, though slight, and her movements suggested that she had grace and poise. "Take off the veil," Kanemi snapped. The slave took off the veil, and there, standing before us in all her glory, was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. Her face was so radiant and calm that I had a sudden inclination to throw myself down on my knees and worship her. Her eyes were downcast with long lashes, her lips were slightly parted, and though she was not really smiling, her teeth gleamed in the light of her fire. Truly, as beautiful a woman as I had ever imagined in my wildest dreams. "She is yours for the winning." "But how?" I asked. "That you shall know." He gave another order, and the man helped her back into the saddle. "Come to Ungwan Kanawa tomorrow at nightfall, and I shall tell you. You will have to pick up your fallen sword and bring it along, and while there, remember to hold it more firmly." He laughed tauntily, turned his horse with a swift gesture, and rode away. We sat far into the night after he had left, talking about Kanemi's daughter. Nobody seemed ever to have heard of the prince of the Tuaregs, and as far as Zara was concerned, she was a mysterious princess. So excited was I that I was sorry the prince could not have made our meeting possible that night. It was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to me. Next evening, I saddled my horse and rode to Ungwan Kanawa. It was a little village some 5 miles outside the walls of Kano, and in the midst of it was a large mound decorated with flags and humming with music. Obviously, some big sport was in progress, and the man at the gate knew I was expected. Prince Kanemi is inside, he intoned, taking over the reins of my horse. He has been asking about you. You are Mallam Ilia, I suppose. Wondering how he knew my name, I bowed and went in. The whole place was in darkness except for the little spot of light beneath which Zara sat. I had walked barely a few feet in that direction when strong hands gripped me and guided me towards her. Then the lights were brought, and I saw that I was surrounded by about a dozen youths, all in cloaks and turbans. The scabbards dangling from their hips told me of dangerous work to follow. Prince Kanemi appeared, dressed in a rich velvet turban embroidered with gold. From his shoulders hung a gay cloak, gathered about the middle with a large piece of jewelry. He waved his gold-crowned staff, and the music stopped. "Welcome, my sons," he said. "Tonight one of you is going to win the hand of Zara, but he must be the bravest of you all. We live in times when a man's might is his right." He paused suddenly and looked at me. "You have all heard of the Sanchi, I presume." We were silent, and he went on. "It is not a game for faint hearts, but he who thinks that Zara is not a sufficient prize to induce him to take part, let him leave now." Nobody moved, and Kanemi's face darkened. "Some of you here will not breathe tomorrow's air. For this night, Sanchi may claim you." He walked down several steps, inviting us to follow him. Kanemi led us to an open field, in the middle of which was a ring. "This is where the game will be played. You are all to go in there. The lights will be put out. In the darkness, you will try to get your man. Do what you can to disable him. At the end of the game, the man who is left becomes Zara's husband." "Your Majesty," said a thick-set man, "how do we disable our man?" "You have swords, haven't you?" "Yes," said the man. I was thinking," he started about him timidly, the sweat standing on his face. "I was thinking, if the man died, if he dies, we'll remove him." Kanemi turned to us. "Make a ready, man." He waved his staff, and the air was at once filled with the blare of trumpets. When the harsh notes ceased, Kanemi said something to Zara, and she gave us her brand of music. Bringing out her gwoje, an instrument rather like a violin, she played so sweetly and so softly that the night stood still and listened to her. I could not help feeling that there was something mournful about her music, and that great sorrow would be the outcome of this contest. "To the ring!" shouted Kanemi. We crowded in. The enclosure was small, and as soon as we were inside, the lights were put out. I stopped clutching the ropes for a moment, too blinded to the dim shapes of my rivals, even though they were within a few yards of me. At that moment, a strange fear came over me. I realized suddenly that death might be mine in this game, that I might not win the hand I coveted so much. I had heard of Sanchi before Kanemi explained it to us, but never before had I imagined that I should play it, and for such high stakes. In a way, I am glad the British came to Kano so soon after and stamped out such dreadful customs. But the year I speak about was 1892, and human life at that time was worth about as much as a fowl's. Just as I had become used to the darkness, A man stole past me, creeping so that I might not hear his footsteps. I drew my knife, crouched, and sprang like a leopard upon him. He groaned and leapt backwards. A second later, a piercing scream told its own story. Someone had finished him off. The lights were brought in. Kanemi's men came into the ring and carried the bleeding body out of the ring. During that interval, men studied the position of their opponents. Again, we were all in darkness. Two simultaneous groans filled the air. In came the lights to the ring, and two bodies were carried out. The game of Sanchi was warming up. 3 men gone, 9 left. Every time the ring was lighted, Kanemi smacked his lips with satisfaction and smoothed his waxy mustache. Zara, I noticed, had stopped playing her guje and sitting up on her sofa, was staring wide-eyed at the ring. She looked truly lovely. The fire in her eyes made me wish I could win her, and I was determined to fight to the death. One by one, we thinned. At last, only 4 of us were left. Of the 8 who had been removed, 4 were quite disabled and 4 were quite dead. Excitement mounted among the spectators as the 4 of us stood in the light of the lamps, panting and glaring. When the lights went out, I threw myself down on my stomach and with a sudden spin gripped someone by the legs and threw him down. He stabbed furiously at me, but I was on top of him like a car. 2 quick stabs and he was silent. The body of my first victim was removed from the ring. 3 men left. For a brief moment, I saw my 2 adversaries. They were big men. One of them stood well over 6 feet in height. He was looking at me and knew that he would make for me the moment the light went out again. And so it happened. He swept past me just as I sprang aside. There was a wild yell of "Yeo!" Regaining my balance, I leapt in his direction, striking out with a short knife drawn from the band around my elbow. I must have hit him in a vital spot, for he fell without a sound. When the lights went up, I gasped with disappointment. The man who had fallen was not the bigger man, but my second adversary. He had rushed at me in the same instant and had cut the thrust. There were now only 2 of us left. My opponent indeed was an enormous man, big-jawed and long-toothed. "You are going to die now," he growled. "Your knife can do nothing to me. I have swallowed the medicine against steel." He jabbed himself suddenly with his knife and the blade bent. He threw it down and drew another from his wrist. The lights were removed and was alone with him. I have never been nearer death in my life. What chance had I against him? He could smash me with his fist, and my knife, my sole aid, was useless. I was feeling stiff and sore, and the prospect of being stabbed made me nervous and breathless. I didn't know how to last it out. Would a miracle happen? Would Kanemi call it all off and say he had changed his mind? For a long time, we maneuvered around the ring. I moved slowly with the quietness and caution of a chameleon, pausing to listen for him. But never once did I hear him. We met suddenly, and he stabbed furiously at me. His elbow catching me on the head sent a shiver down my spine. With that sudden strength born of panic, I made a wide upthrust at his body, but the knife bent like a pin, and I knew then what he had meant when he said that he had swallowed a medicine against steel. He was wearing a coat of chain armor. That realization summarized my chances. Henceforth, cunning rather than valor would be my weapon. He gave chase as I ran. I had no clear idea in my head what to do when my breath failed me. I ran zigzag around the ring. Then my luck turned. All of a sudden he fell. I was quick to see what had happened. He had stepped on the knife which he had thrown down, and the bent razor-edged blade had pierced his bare foot as easily as the sun pierces the clouds. I saw that now was my chance. Drawing my knife, I thrust it at his bare neck. He was powerless. Given the same opportunity, I am quite certain that he would have killed me. But I merely disabled him, and therein lay my mistake, a mistake which I have regretted all my life. I left him there in his blood, while Kanemi took me to my prize. "Zara," he said, "you have won a brave husband." "A lucky one," I corrected. When all the excitement of the contest had died down, arrangements were made for Zara and me to leave for home. Her father detailed some horsemen to accompany us, and later a company of women brought Zara's things. From what I gathered of their talk, none of them appeared particularly happy about my victory. Zara, they hinged, was a woman who carried bad luck with her, and her beauty, they feared, would bring me ruin and unhappiness, as it had done to others. I was not happy to hear all this, but I quickly tried to put their warnings out of my mind.